Hello, thank you for being in a new video. This time I have the Realme 13 Pro Plus. We are going to do a complete review. Let's get started. This device in many ways looks a lot like last generation, so I'll try to go a little bit fast on aspects that will be completely the same. So if there's any data or any feature that I didn't show you, it's because it's the same as last generation, so you can go check it out. But for now, let me advance you that it is probably the best camera in the range, since it really competes in a price range where we usually do not find cameras this attractive. In Mexico, it has been launched in two versions. The basic version of 8GB of RAM with 256 of storage has an introductory price of 8,499 pesos. On the screen, you see the reference price in dollars just to give you an idea. But remember that the prices here are not the same as over there. There is another edition with 12GB of RAM and 512GB of storage at a price of 9,799 pesos at launch. Again, you see the reference price in dollars just to give you an idea. It has interesting competitors, but in the photographic section, I think this device surpasses them by far. So, if you are looking for the best camera in this segment, I think there is currently no other that can surpass what this device offers. But obviously there are more points to take into account, so join me in getting to know it little by little so you can decide if it is the option you are looking for or not. The design of this device is nice, although on the front it is not as unique as on the back. But in this case, we are going to find a slightly curved glass and screen on the edges that gives it a nice touch both to the touch and to the eye. The bezels are remarkably reduced considering its price point. And in this case, on the front, we are going to find an armor shield glass protection from realme that definitely has a very good resistance. Last generation had the same with a thick glass, so it will be more complicated to break compared to traditional glass. In fact, it's curious that Gorilla Glass is also mentioned within its specs, so I'm not sure how it works in this deal. But in general, we could say that yes, it will be a resistant glass, although I dare not test it. On the sides, we are going to find a plastic frame, although with a metallic look that gives it a good appearance. On the right side, we will have power buttons along with volume button, while at the top is placed a microphone along with secondary audio output with 3 perforations. The left side is completely clean, but it serves to give you a look at the frame, which is very thin. Although the full thickness of the device is 8.23 millimeters, which is still somewhat thin, considering that it also has a weight of 190 grams, so it is a well-stylized device. At the bottom, we are going to find access to the tray, where we can place 2 nano SIM cards, although remember that this may vary depending on where you buy it. So in Mexico, it is distributed on Amazon and Mercado Libre. In both cases, it retains this dual SIM tray, but it may vary in other regions. Here below is also placed another microphone along with the USB-C port, and finally the 4-hole grill for the main speaker. The back will be where the device will gain a lot of spotlight because it is an extremely nice design. Realme claims that it is inspired by Monet and some works of art. The truth is that it is a very nice design. I have the gold color edition that has a glass back cover, but it is also available in green color with a synthetic leather back cover. In this case, the glass cover comes with a very nice pattern that also has some texture. The fingerprints are not going to be marked, it seems to have like sand around here, and the camera module is surrounded by a textured ring as well, which gives it a very nice element at the design level. Overall, we could say that it is a device that looks very nice in terms of its aesthetics, and unlike other devices that have a very nice design in the camera module that make it look very sophisticated but are simple cameras, in this case it does have those two elements. A very nice and striking design for the camera module, but at the same time it does have cameras that will indeed be of good quality. We will talk more about them later, but for now I think it complies very well in terms of design since it also has the IPS level of resistance against water and dust. That is, it resists dust quite well, although water will only resist simple splashes. Possibly if you get to fall into very shallow water, it will survive without problems, although in this sense there are rivals that offer a higher level of protection against water and dust, so this is possibly one of the points that are a little weak with respect to the rest. The screen is 6.7 inches. It will offer us very good quality in this regard. Yes, it's very similar to last generation screen, which was also very good. Full HD plus resolution, density of 394 pixels per inch, so small texts look very good. It has AMOLED technology with vivid colors, high contrast, good viewing angles. It even has 120 Hz in its refresh rate for smooth movements, and in this case, its peak brightness is 2000 nits. Of course, it's a spectacular display wherever you want to look at it. However, a small downside, to say the least, is that it doesn't support HDR content, nor does it support XDR technology when viewing photos. So it's a good display, not as spectacular as I would have liked to see from realme. Anyway, it also integrates smart touch technology so that even when wet, it still reacts to touches in a good way. It also has a very good high brightness. The low brightness, I think, is also good, although it doesn't support the extra dimming option, so you can have an even lower and more comfortable brightness. This display includes 3 color calibration modes, but in Pro mode we have, shall we say, another category where you can specifically adjust the color you want this display to show. Personally, I like the natural setting better, but there it's up to each user. In this case, it has a manual color temperature adjustment, so it doesn't have the natural tone option that we find on some other Realme and Oppo devices. Fortunately, it also has the option to keep the screen on while it detects that you are watching it, although that will consume more power. Overall, as I say, it's a good screen, although it could still be better, but for the price range, it performs perfectly well. We will also find stereo sound, perfectly well placed. Let's listen to a small test, although it is not the same as listening to it live. Although it is a sound where the mid frequencies stand out much more than we would like, so the bass is not perceived as powerful. The sound quality is not so high, but fortunately it does have good stereo amplitude. Through software, I think it is not so well endowed because we will find all reality audio to try to replace Dolby Atmos, but in general it only offers us some sound style presets. However, it doesn't offer us a specific equalizer unless you connect headphones. So you can modify the audio style of the speakers, and I think that's a strong limitation. Also consider that it doesn't have a headphone jack, but fortunately it has good support for wireless audio codecs, as it has the full catalog: LHDC, LDAC, and aptX, including the adaptive setting. So there is no problem if you want to use high-resolution headphones. In this device we will find 2 microphones. Let's do a test.
Esta es una prueba de audio hecha con los micrófonos integrados del Realme 13 Pro Plus.
Obviously, for vocals in a simple environment, you're not going to have problems in the pickup. In fact, through software, it comes with an option called Clear Voice that will allow us to enable a kind of noise reduction for compatible video calling applications. I wish this option could be enabled or disabled in general, system-wide and not just in supported applications, but it's a nice improvement. Next, let's hear how it performs in a much noisier environment. Fortunately, it seems that the microphones get to adjust their gain well to avoid any distortion, so it could also be used in a positive way when recording a concert. Finally, I remind you that this device incorporates a vibration motor on the X-axis. So yes, it's quite a premium vibration, something that is not so common in the price range, and in fact, Realme, through the software, allows us to modify the intensity of this vibration motor. And it is very well exploited because, for example, when you activate or deactivate some option, you will feel this feedback in your hand. Similarly, when you modify, for example, the brightness or some slider of this style, it will also emit this type of vibration or feedback in the hand. Likewise, when navigating lists or similar things. So it's an operating system that takes really very good advantage of the optical engine. And in that sense, the experience is very advanced. The front camera is 32 megapixels with f2.45 aperture and fixed focus. If we press twice any of the volume keys when the device is locked, we will be able to access the camera. Although it accesses directly to the urban mode, where curiously you can't rotate to the front camera, so you have to switch to normal photo mode and then to selfie mode to be able to take pictures of yourself quickly. So, it doesn't really have quick photo shortcuts, as it doesn't actually work when the device is unlocked. So, there is no quick unlock gesture in this regard. When the device is locked, you could also draw an O, although this is a gesture that also comes disabled by default and you have to enable it in the settings. It offers 2 levels of amplitude and the capture is not very agile, especially when we are in backlit scenarios. The device will show us a list of filters that we can preview in real time. There is also a facial retouching mode that comes on by default. Personally, I always turn it off when testing, but it has a lot of options for facial blurring, changing the size of the nose, the size of the cheekbones, a lot of elements in case you want to have a very fake look. In the settings, we will also find the gesture to show the palm and be able to capture photos in scenarios where pressing the shutter can become a bit complicated. Photos with the front-facing camera on this device look good quality. There is a good level of detail, without a doubt, although having fixed focus, you must be at a very specific distance to be well focused. But in terms of colors, we will also find something positive. Note, for example, that if you are too far away from this camera, the level of detail might drop, but I still think it is high enough to maintain good quality in the photo. However, if you wanted to capture something close to your face, it won't be possible. However, it is a camera with a very good level of range for group shots. Note that in this case, we are practically at the same distance and the result is really positive. The level of detail can be reduced if the person is very far away, but this device has a special function. Through artificial intelligence, it will be able to raise the level of detail of the faces in these group photographs. So it can become a useful feature. Now, in indoor scenes, it's not going to have as much level of detail as what we were seeing outdoors, but I still think the result is good enough, although not totally grain-free. Maybe the colors don't have the desired saturation, but remember that we're in a much lower lighting environment, so here it is much more noticeable that you have a low light aperture. In backlit scenes, note that the preview is not well optimized. However, the result is going to be good in terms of light and shadow balance, although the shadow area has a bit more grain than we would like, but overall I think it does make a good balance. At night, for the purpose of trying to remove quite a bit of noise, notice that it has a bit of strange processing. In fact, in this case, I might claim that it created a bit of artificial beard. So the algorithm that tries to optimize the detail might on some occasions get a little too confused. But for the most part, it manages to reduce the noise well while maintaining the level of detail well. However, as I say, it's not perfect. Note that in these much more complicated conditions of night backlighting, the result is going to be a bit strange, especially because it's going to use the screen to try to illuminate your face. But generally, when you have some mica close to the camera, it produces these kind of reflections that alter the color and contrast a little bit on the edges, and again we see a little bit of strange behavior to try to create, in a way, artificial detail. So it's weird, the result. I didn't like it too much. If you don't use the screen to illuminate your face, the result is going to get worse with respect to the balance of light and shadow. Note that specifically in the face, it does manage to have a good level of detail, but to a large extent we could say that it is an artificial detail. In fact, look at this eye. It's a little bit strange. So I think it's got a pretty interesting algorithm that's trying to improve the detail in the face, but notice that other areas will have really very little detail. So the selfies I didn't like so much in low light conditions. In very very dark conditions, notice that the preview reveals to us the penumbra that we were in. And the result is quite natural in the sense that it doesn't fake too much lighting, although it's obviously a simple result. If you use the screen to illuminate the face, it more or less improves in that respect, but again creates a bit of fake detail at times and the edges of the photo come out a bit darker. It's the price to pay for having such a large camera. And the portrait photo at night is not very good quality. Notice that in this case, it does not run that same algorithm of enhancing the level of detail of the face. So here we have a photograph without the artificial details that it gave us in automatic mode, but with the blur applied for the portrait effect. And in daytime, we notice that it fails to keep the foreground objects in focus, so the result can be a bit strange in these kinds of conditions. It is better to take a picture without any objects nearby, and in that sense, it does generate an interesting bokeh effect. On the back, we will find a photographic system very similar to the one we saw last generation, but in this case, we will find completely new sensors. So this is where there will be more evolution with respect to the last generation, even though it seems to keep the same cameras. We will find the ultra-wide camera of 16mm with 8 megapixels, f2.2 aperture and fixed focus. That would be the camera that does remain the same as last generation, but the main camera now integrates a new Sony lithium sensor. We are talking about a 50 megapixel sensor. The lens has f1.88 aperture, retains autofocus and optical stabilization. The fact of using a lithium sensor will allow us a better image processing, better backlight, and better in all aspects. In fact, it's going to give us a crop inside the sensor to give us a perspective close to 50mm with this same lens. Then we're going to jump up to 73mm with the telephoto camera. Again, we see a Sony lithium sensor, so it's a recent generation sensor and that also brings very good features. In this case, it's a 50 megapixel sensor. The lens has f2.65 aperture, autofocus and optical stabilization. We are talking about approximately 3x optical zoom, and if you apply a crop on the sensor, it could give you 6x zoom with good quality of about 144mm. So I insist the whole photographic system is very advanced and very attractive. The camera is going to have a smooth enough response to multiple touches. In our test, we also saw that it responds quickly to the touch. It doesn't take a fifth of a second for it to respond and take the picture, so the result is good. The burst takes almost 3/4 of a second to start, so that one is a bit slow and has a limit of 20 photos, so there is little space between one photo and another, which is positive, but the burst ends very soon, in less than a second. The rest of the sections in the interface are the same as last generation, so what do you say we jump to see the results it gave us? You can take advantage of the high resolution mode with the main camera, and note that we are going to find a good resolution to apply some cropping to the picture, although the sharpness does not seem to me as spectacular as I have been able to witness in some other devices. Note that you still don't see such an exaggerated level of detail even though the photography is indeed high resolution. The telephoto camera also integrates a high resolution sensor that we can take advantage of in this special mode, but it is exactly the same result. It seems to have a bit artificial detail at times, although as I say, if you can apply some cropping to the photograph and still maintain a good level of detail. But note how the ultra-wide camera performs well in these outdoor moving conditions. The main camera also performs well enough freezing the weather, and the telephoto camera is the one that might have a bit more complications in this kind of movements, but still the result is positive. Let's look at other examples of outdoor photography to analyze the quality of the lenses. Note that in this case it is the ultra-wide camera, and if it generates a little distortion and chromatic aberration at the edges, nothing too serious, so we could still forgive it. Although considering that it is not an ultra-wide camera as wide as the one found in other devices, if we are to be picky, it is an ultra-wide camera that is not at the same level as the rest of the cameras. The main camera will obviously improve in several aspects. In fact, it also shows a good level of detail and the chromatic aberration could go a little more unnoticed. Something important is that this device can give us the perspective of 49mm as if we were using a telephoto camera by applying a crop on the sensor. In this case, I think it does maintain optical quality. It shows a good quality in the image, so it could give you this kind of photographs with a 2x zoom, let's say, still maintaining the correct detail. The 73mm telephoto lens has a good performance too. In this case, obviously the level of detail will be even higher, and we do not find distortions or anything weird at the edges. In fact, it also allows us to take photographs at 144mm by applying a crop on the sensor with 6x zoom. Although in this case, I think you do get to notice that it is digital zoom, but it is a very good quality digital zoom, so it's not bad at all. But how about looking at the full zoom range? Notice that this is the 16mm ultra-wide camera, which is not that wide. Then the 24mm camera, which is the main camera. Now you're looking at the 49mm setup with a crop on the sensor, and I insist that it does maintain good image quality. Now we are looking at the 73mm lens that is built into the telephoto camera. Then the 144mm image, and throughout this range, it has retained very good image quality. Now you're looking at a 10x zoom photograph that has a 240mm focal length perspective. And watch, we see a good level of detail. Of course, you can tell it's digital zoom, but believe me, the performance is really very good, especially considering the price of this device. Really, the zoom is going to be the best, and it's going to outperform virtually all of its competitors in this aspect. In fact, this is a picture with 20x zoom, where I consider it would be its maximum with a good quality. We still manage to see several details, especially in letters that are easily distinguishable for the camera algorithm. As you realize, some other areas of the photograph that are perhaps not so recognizable objects do not have as much detail. That's why I insist that this would be the maximum zoom for me. However, this device goes up to 120x zoom, where I consider that to be overkill. Simply for marketing, they can take it that far, but there really isn't that much quality there. Still, in this price range, it's the best zoom you're going to find. This would be the maximum zoom I'm talking about, and it's clear that it doesn't retain remarkable quality. Indoors, the ultra-wide camera seems to me to perform well in this type of low-light photography. It maintains color saturation well. Maybe the level of detail will not be as high because of trying to reduce noise, but the overall photo result is good. The main camera will have a better level of detail because it doesn't have to deal with as much noise. Note that again we see good colors, but I insist that above all, we will see much more detail than what we saw with the ultra-wide camera. The telephoto camera also performs quite well in these types of scenarios, maintaining a good level of detail. I thought it would have a very similar result to the ultra-wide camera, but it looks more like the main camera, which speaks very well of this camera. It even notes that if we take the picture at 6x zoom, indoors it still retains a good level of detail. In backlit scenes, he notes that the preview makes a good effort to balance highlights and shadows, although there are still some overexposed areas. But when capturing the photograph, it does manage to do a good job of balancing these highlights with the shadow area to give a good result with the ultra-wide camera. The main camera does an even more advanced job, as in the ultra-wide camera the shadow areas looked slightly darker than they should, but in the main camera the result is very good. And with the telephoto camera, he notes that it gives us a spectacular result. It would even look like a portrait photograph because of the blur that is naturally generated in the background, but this is not yet portrait mode. However, you could take very nice portraits without portrait mode, retaining an excellent balance of light and shadow. Truth be told, my favorite camera in this price range. And at night, the result is also very good. This is thanks to its hyper-image image engine, which I hadn't mentioned, but which really does a very good job. Notice that it balances the brighter areas well, controls noise well even in the darker areas, and in this case we are talking about the ultra-wide camera, which generally has a very simple behavior. In fact, the level of detail will be simple. We do not see something so spectacular, but if you do not pay attention to the details from very close, I think it is a picture that you could perfectly share on social networks with good quality. The main camera improves mainly in the level of detail because the rest of the features still have the good performance that we saw in the ultra-wide camera. However, note that the details have been improved. Also, the telephoto lens has this same performance at night, balancing well the brighter areas, handling noise well, maintaining good saturation and good detail. Overall, it performs very well. Even with the 44mm perspective, we still see this same good performance. So I also wanted to put it to the test in a much darker environment. Here you're looking at the ultra-wide camera preview, and the result with the ultra-wide camera is not as spectacular in terms of the level of detail, but I remind you it was a pretty dark situation. So I still come to accept this performance, especially since it handles color very well. It really didn't get confused. However, the main camera improves this picture tremendously, having a higher level of detail and still handling color well. What surprised me is that even at this level of darkness, it did use the 73mm lens instead of going for digital zoom as other devices tend to do. Although the result does not have such an exaggerated level of detail, but I like that they actually use the 73mm camera. I find the performance spectacular. Perhaps macro photography is the weakest point of this device because the main camera can't be too close to the objects because you notice that it has some complications to focus evenly on very small objects. What you can do is try to zoom in 2x to have a little bit better focus without the need to be so close to the objects, and this is the best you can achieve. Because if you try to use the 73mm lens, you're going to find that it's actually digital zoom because the telephoto lens doesn't have macro capabilities. So this would be its only weak point. As you can see, panoramic photography is going to offer a good level of detail. It is not a very high resolution photo, but with good sharpness and above all with good color management. Although you cannot use the ultra-wide camera in this panoramic mode, so it would be a suggestion of better. Another section that I really liked about this device is the portrait photography. Notice that in this case it is with the main camera and it performs well, maintaining a good level of detail in the face. It also detects depth well to keep objects in focus. So overall, portrait photography is already good with the main camera, but where it's going to really shine is when you use the 73mm lens. This is a telephoto lens, as I told you. Portrait photographs generally have this telephoto perspective. And this is a feature that you're virtually not going to find in competitors. Also, note that it maintains an excellent level of detail. The edge detection is very good. It also detects objects. The bokeh effect is also nice. So that may be one of its strongest points. But in the evenings, note that we're also going to have good portrait photography with the main camera. Even the lens area, which is usually very complicated to detect, it performs it with a good quality. And with the 73mm lens, the only thing I didn't like was the white balance, which became a little bit warmer than it should be. But note that again, the depth detection is very good and the bokeh effect it can generate is also nice. Portrait photography gets all my respects. For video recording, note that in this case it allows us up to 30 frames per second in 4K. But in this configuration, you will not be able to use the ultra-wide camera. Only the main camera, the telephoto, and of course the front camera. So the ultra-wide is the one that falls a little short, having the capacity only in full HD at 30 frames per second. Because if you switch to 60, again the ultra-wide camera is disabled again. So it's very easy to record with that camera. When you're recording video, you can take pictures, you can pause and resume your recording, and you can even turn on the flashlight, but you can't rotate to the front camera without first having the video recording. Fortunately, it shows a pretty comfortable ring on the recording, and if you're recording in full HD, it's gonna do some switching between the cameras. Within the movie mode, we can have a manual mode, although it will force recording in a wide format, which I don't really like, but here you have access to some manual controls as well. The ultra-wide camera does not have the ability to record video in 4K, so the quality will be very simple for video. In fact, I was already telling you from the photography that the ultra-wide camera is perceived to be below the other cameras in terms of quality. And in the video, you will not be the exception. It will not be so advisable to record with this camera. However, I think the main camera goes up a notch. It records in 4K, has good detail, good color. In general, it looks a stable video in other parameters such as exposure or focus, at least in this kind of scenarios where there is no complication whatsoever. However, you should know that although it gives you the 3x zoom as a shortcut on the camera, it will actually be digital zoom. If you want to actually use the telephoto camera, you have to stop the video and start it again. But to give you a clearer view of how the zoom behaves, observe, here we are with the main camera, and although we are zooming in little by little, at no time does the lens change. If you stop the video, you can start recording in 4K with the telephoto camera to have a better view and better clarity in terms of what has to do with zoom. And in this case, the maximum zoom will be 18x, and I think it maintains good quality. The stabilization could perhaps be slightly better, but the result is good. It would be much better if it allowed dynamic switching between all the lenses. The alternative you have if you want to switch between the three cameras is to record in full HD, since in 4K it is not possible. But note that in full HD it can make this transition between the three cameras, which gives you much more versatility, but not so much level of detail. That would be something I would like to see improved in some next generation. Indoors, note that again, the ultra-wide camera is pretty disastrous. It has a lot of noise, although there comes a point where the noise seems to be controlled a bit better, but I honestly don't recommend you record with this camera. The main camera is much better in this regard. It controls noise better. It is practically indistinguishable. It also maintains good color saturation and detail. And finally, the telephoto camera also has a good performance, although it is not completely free of noise, but honestly the result seems to me of good quality. In backlit scenes it makes a good balance between highlights and shadows, although the ultra-wide camera again gives us a feeling of being a low-quality camera. But speaking specifically of backlighting, it handles it well. Again, you'll notice that the main camera goes all the way up a notch, though still the highlight area might look slightly overexposed. There are some areas that still manage to burn in, but it does a good balance, which in this price range is quite remarkable because generally in the mid-range they don't usually do this balance between highlights and shadows, so the quality seems to me to be completely outstanding. And with the telephoto camera, I noticed that also at the beginning it was giving me a very good balance of light and shadow. However, there was a moment where it seemed to stop detecting the face and the shadow area kept it slightly darker than it should be, but the truth is that the performance doesn't seem bad to me, especially considering the price range it has. At night, the ultra-wide camera better not even tell you it's really bad. So let's skip it, I've already told you many times. The main camera really improves a lot. It will control noise very well. It maintains a good level of detail. It's not able to properly expose the brighter areas, but that's normal in this price range. And the darker areas don't appear full of noise. It maintains good detail, good color saturation. The recording is really good at night. Although with the telephoto camera we are going to have a more complex result, so more noise will appear as it has much smaller aperture and less light enters, but even so, the telephoto camera still makes a good effort to maintain good video quality, it's just darker. The only positive thing we found with the ultra-wide camera is the stabilization, because even when running, I think it holds these fast movements well, although the image quality is another thing, but the stabilization is good. The main camera is not going to have this same level of stabilization, so if you're walking it's going to be noticeable, and if you're running it's going to be even more noticeable. This I think is something we could ask for improvement, especially when you're shooting in 4K. Maybe in Full HD it goes a little better, but if you activate the ultra steady mode, it will record in Full HD at 60 frames per second, and you can see that it is able to improve by compensating well for these very aggressive movements in scenes with too much action. Regarding the telephoto camera, we will not find something positive as it only has optical stabilization, but we do not see any advanced digital stabilization or an additional mode or anything like that. The focus will handle it in a good way. Notice that it's a very fast responding focus and yet it's stable. It doesn't seem to be hesitating at any time. Even in more subtle movements, zooming in or out, it still maintains a good focus, so it's definitely a positive experience. The telephoto camera, as I anticipated you, does not allow a focus on very close objects. It must be at a fairly far distance for it to work. This device also features portrait video recording mode, blurring the background, although the result is not very nice. It is in Full HD, so it does not offer good detail. Some objects are not kept in focus if they are outside the area of your body, nor does the intensity of the blur effect change depending on the distance. Although fortunately the blur effect is maintained even if it stops detecting the face, but it is very simple. Note that the objects, not being in focus, produce a very strange and artificial effect. It also allows you to zoom while recording with this mode to have a telephoto perspective, but even more noise appears and still has the same behavior of not keeping objects in focus. The fast motion mode has no stabilization, which definitely produces an awkward result if you recorded scenes with movement. It can go from 10x, which is useful for recording people, or you can take it up to 960x, with which you could record landscapes in a very nice way. In fact, I think this device works best in these kinds of scenes where you have the device static on some base. In slow motion, we will find three settings. 120 frames per second, which can be in HD or Full HD. Of course, in this case, we only recorded it in Full HD because it would be the highest possible slow motion resolution. I think the result is acceptable. Nothing impressive, but it's okay. There is also slow motion at 240 frames per second, which would go slower, but in this case, the level of detail is reduced down to HD. Although for social networking scenes, it might be fun to shoot such a video. The front camera has as a positive point the fact that it can record in 4K. However, it does not have stabilization in this setting. Interestingly, despite not having as much stabilization, it does not have as wide a perspective. Fortunately, backlighting performs well. We don't see that it struggles too much to properly expose the brighter areas, but the fact that it doesn't have stabilization weighs a lot for me. Indoors, we are going to notice that there is a greater presence of noise, but I think we could still consider this result acceptable, although as you can see it will not be its specialty to record video with the front camera. A fast camera mode is also available on the front camera. Fortunately, in this case, it does have stabilization, but you don't have slow motion. What you will find is a portrait video recording mode with the background out of focus, but it's not very useful. Note that with movement and as you walk you notice this artificial effect a bit, although possibly in static scenarios you can have a better performance. Also note that it is not able to keep objects in focus, giving an unnatural result. In this case, we will also find the dual recording mode with which you can show the rear camera and the front camera at the same time. You can have this picture-in-picture mode where you can move the floating image with a small boundary on the right. This box has completely straight corners, so it doesn't look that advanced in terms of its aesthetics, but note that it does maintain autofocus and also maintains the ability to zoom, so overall I think the performance is positive in this feature. You could also activate a round view with exactly the same behavior I already described, or also a view split completely in half. In all scenarios, the recording is in full HD, and in this case of the half split view, it does not allow you to reallocate the space of each of the cameras, but it is necessarily half. In software, let's face it, it integrates the same as last generation. In fact, realme has taken a bit of a weird strategy because less than a year passed and updated its device, so even the software is still in the same version. There are no changes, but it integrates 2 new artificial intelligence features, which I will show you below. But you should know that it comes with Android 14 and Realme UI 5.0 with 2 years of software updates and 3 years of security patches. So, it doesn't offer such an extended policy, and considering that Realme UI 6 is about to be released, it seems to me that the timing of the launch of this device was not right with respect to software. While Realme UI 6 is expected to have good new features and a nice aesthetic change, it is going to wear out an update very soon. One of the main new features of this device at the artificial intelligence level is focused on restoring photos that have a very low resolution or look a bit damaged. See for example how this picture looks, quite pixelated and of poor quality. So we can access the photo editor, which there is a new option, although in beta at the moment, which is called Ultra Clarity. Let's click on it. But look how strange. Right now it says the image is too small, but I had previously tested it and it did work fine. So that's a demonstration that it's in beta. It's still not a 100% finished feature. So on a software level, it's very disappointing that it's a new generation, but we have pretty much the same as last generation. And the new features don't seem to work as well as they should. Although as I told you, I had done the test before, and I noticed that the result really did look quite well restored from the original picture, which looked very pixelated. So the idea is good, but I think the implementation is still in development, and we could not consider it as a strong point for that reason. Also, it is an artificial intelligence tool that does require internet connection, just like the draft that comes with generative artificial intelligence. Note that in this case, we can simply enclose the person or object we want to erase. It makes an automatic detection and the feeling will be with generative artificial intelligence, but it also requires internet connection. Although the result is really very good, you can hardly notice that you have deleted a person. So the eraser is very good and is one of the new features compared to last generation. Although probably also this function could receive it through an update, the Realme Pro Plus, if it has not already received it. At the security level, it will also be the same as last generation. In-display fingerprint reader, it is an optical reader with support for 5 fingerprints. It will work well, it also has facial recognition, 2 dimensions, nothing advanced. And the rest of the features, as I tell you, same as last generation. Google Extended Unlock, App Lock, App Cloning, App Hiding, Payment Protection, Secure Folder. It has several tools that we could consider as an attractive point. Only in this case, I insist that by bringing exactly the same software as the last generation, it disappoints a bit in the sense of how attractive it could become. Consider that last generation will surely have a much lower price, and if it offers you pretty much the same, there is a little less motivation to purchase this device, although it has an eye-catching price but very similar to last generation in many ways. Let's talk about the battery, which is one of the points that did change from the last generation. Now we will find a capacity of 5200 mAh, which I think is a small evolution but a good one. In fact, it came pretty much close to achieving 5 hours of battery life in my extreme drain test, pushing it to the max, which I consider to be a very positive thing. Battery life, I think, is a good thing. Although it doesn't do a good job of managing apps running in the background, because in my background test we generally found a more extended duration than the foreground test, but in this case it was a shorter duration. So yes, it will be very important that you keep the apps you are not using closed to have a good battery life. Possibly if you use the power saving mode, it can help a lot in an everyday use to extend the battery life much more. Or you also have the ultra save mode that helps a lot in emergency situations. This generation supports 80-watt charging as opposed to the last generation which supported 67-watt charging. However, we won't actually see faster charging because they also increased the battery capacity. So, basically what they did was they gave you a charger that you can have the same charging time as last generation, even though the battery is bigger. So in my 15-minute test, it even charged less percentage than the last generation, coming in at 35%, but the full charge it finished in exactly the same time, 53 minutes. So, it's a good charge, the battery life is good. I wish they would improve the management of applications running in the background to have a much more advanced experience in battery life, but the rest of the features are fine. In this case, we won't find wireless charging, but we do find both smart charging and an 80% charge limit to take care of battery life. Although it does not allow us to see the percentage of useful life, which would be even better in case you want to buy this device secondhand. Regarding connectivity, it is exactly the same as last generation because it has the same processor as last generation. Something unusual in smartphones, but in this case, even though it is a new version, it has exactly the same processor. It supports 5G network, it supports Wi-Fi 6, it has NFC, it's fine. In Bluetooth, maybe it falls a little bit short with the 5.2 version because being a processor from past generations, it starts to feel a little bit old, although as I tell you, not much time passed between one generation and the other. So it's a bit of an odd decision by Realme on this device. But in the sensors, fortunately, yes, we're going to find a completely physical proximity sensor, so there's no downside. And the realme ecosystem hasn't evolved much since last generation's launch, so we're going to say it's exactly the same. An ecosystem that has a light variety of products and without such advanced interaction between them. Overall, Realme is a brand that is still very dependent on Google for cloud storage, for home device control, and for file transfer technologies or fast connection between devices. So Realme is very Google dependent. Although fortunately it does have multi-screen connect, which is a technology that they themselves have developed so that you can connect your cell phone to a Windows computer. As you know, Realme does not have its own laptops, but through this technology you could try to use your cell phone from the computer. But it does require a much more complex step-by-step configuration, unlike other brands that have a very easy and simple connectivity between your cell phone and your laptop. That's why I'm telling you that the Realme ecosystem is still short. But let's go to the performance test, because theoretically, it should be a performance virtually identical to the last generation, since it integrates the same processor, Snapdragon 7S Gen 2, with a RAM of about 12 GB and a storage of about 512 GB in this unit, which is the one I'll be testing. It took roughly 2.8 seconds on average to open each application. The performance was very good. But just as we suspected, it's pretty much a carbon copy of last generation's performance. There is no evolution in that aspect. Although honestly, it was not bad last generation, so it is not perceived as something negative that maintains this same level of performance. Thanks to the integration of these 12 GB of RAM, you notice that it perfectly keeps all these applications that we have open at the moment without any major reboots or anything like that. In fact, it's also going to maintain a smooth navigation experience within these applications. The device is quite responsive. It doesn't have any issues in this regard. The 512GB model is going to be highly recommended for users who need to have a lot of space. It is not going to fill up easily. Even the 256 model gives a good experience. Just remember that it does not have a micro SD card slot. Although the manufacturer does not specify what version of storage we find here, but as you realize, it is not an extremely fast storage. So it sacrifices a bit of speed to give you very good capacity. Although for the vast majority of users, it will be a good enough speed, both reading and writing. But if you want the top of the line storage, you won't find the most extreme speeds in this case. But let's do a practical test. As usual, we have several clips here. We're going to do a price-appropriate test with clips recorded with this device, which together add up to about a minute, all of them at 4K. Let's wait how long it takes to determine whether it is very fast at this task or not. And that's it. As you can see, it took 2 minutes. It takes a lot of trouble to edit video in 4K, so it's not recommended. Curiously though, it seems that CapCut is now compatible with this processor because when we tested last generation, it did not allow us to export in 4K using this processor. So there is a little improvement, but in reality the processor is not powerful enough to work with these kind of videos. Regarding the gaming experience, you should know that at the software level we will find exactly the same, so I invite you to see the last review if you want to know all the tools. In fact, in performance theoretically it should be the same or very similar, but let me tell you how we did to check it. In Call of Duty, the compatibility is exactly the same as last generation because it keeps the same processor. However, we were hoping that as several months have passed, the game would be better optimized, but no. It keeps exactly the same graphics support as last generation. It keeps exactly the same limited graphics support, which definitely disappoints a lot if you like advanced visual effects. The result is exactly the same as last generation, with few variations obviously due to the environment, but what I did notice is that overall the device maintains a slightly cooler experience than last generation. Although again, this could also be due to ambient temperature factors, but that would be hard to prove when the test was several months ago. However, yes, it does have a cool experience. We also played Legends by switching the auto setting to a medium setting at 60 frames per second. And again, it did quite well. I think what comes to the forefront is the temperature. It maintains a fairly stable experience with high frames per second. Overall, the experience was pretty good. On SpongeBob, we selected the medium resolution and quality at 60 frames per second and the smoothing turned on. And I think the performance again was good enough. It doesn't maintain a completely stable experience, but it does have good stability. It doesn't noticeably drop its frames even at its low peaks. But again, what's remarkable is the temperature control that it has, which is quite good. And yes, I consider it to be better than last generation in that regard. Finally, in Henshin Impact, in this case, we selected the low quality at 60 frames per second to see if it was able to give us this high refresh rate. Since last generation, we tested it with medium graphics quality, but it was not able to exceed 30 frames per second. And in this case, we were very disappointed because even though we lowered the graphics quality, it was again limited to 30 frames per second. So it's a device that's not going to excel at all in gaming. Not that it's going to give you a bad experience, but definitely that you'll be able to find more advanced things for gaming. So, it seems that somehow this device gives more priority to staying cool even if it sacrifices frames per second. That's why I insist that it won't be focused on gaming, although it doesn't necessarily give you a bad experience, but you could find something more advanced at this price point. As a conclusion, I think it is a very good device, but its biggest rival is the last generation. You've been hearing this phrase a lot throughout the review. It's just that it's a lousy decision for realme to renew its device with about 7 months or even less. So it's really weird what realme has done. But it's a good device. I love the camera. It gives good battery experience with the occasional improvement. It gives good screen, acceptable sound. Overall, I think it is a good competitor without a doubt, especially for the price it manages. For now, we have come to the end of this video. I hope you liked it. If you did, you know you can let me know. See you next time.